don't know how many of you likely know who the Avett brothers are. I got a little bit of an acknowledgement. The Avett brothers, they're a folk rock band built around two brothers. Turn this one off. Okay. A folk rock band built around two brothers, Scott and Seth. They play mostly acoustic music, blending traditional folk and bluegrass with a rock and roll energy and sensibility. My wife and I went to one of their concerts once, actually, and we looked around. We weren't the oldest there, but it has a younger, hipper sensibility. I have a few of their albums all the same. One of those albums is called The Carpenter. And the title song, I suppose, from that album is called The Once and Future Carpenter. Now, the Avett brothers, when they sing this song in the album, it's not about Jesus, the son of Joseph the carpenter. And yet I'm reminded of Jesus all the same, especially that title song from that album. I think Jesus would have liked it. I think he might have liked it a lot. Because here's the thing, when I think of that song, I often think of that song when I consider this morning's gospel. There's a particular line in it. If I live the life I'm given, I won't be scared to die. I'd like to think Jesus would take comfort from the line. I like even to imagine him singing it out there in the wilderness. If I live the life I'm given, I won't be scared to die. Every year on the first Sunday of Lent, we hear the story of Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness. And always, I emphasize, always those 40 days followed directly on the heels of Jesus' baptism and a voice announcing to him, "This is my Son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased." Or in the case of Luke's gospel, the words addressed directly to Jesus himself, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." So when Jesus heads out into the dry, dusty desert, he is, at least metaphorically, still dripping wet. And the words of that heavenly voice, I think, must have been echoing in his ears. Now that much is the same in essence, whichever year we read the story of Jesus' time in the wilderness, whichever gospel account we read in that particular year. And I think it's hard to overstate the significance of that sequence of events. Jesus' baptism followed immediately by 40 days in the wilderness. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they all say the same, and we hear from each of them in a course of 3 recycling years. But the way Luke tells it for us this year, Jesus was never alone out there in the wilderness to face the taunting words of the adversary alone. Luke's gospel begins for us this morning. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. The devil tempts, but Luke says the Holy Spirit filled Jesus and accompanied him there in the wilderness. Now I wonder precisely what that means. We're told what the devil says, but what was the place of the Spirit out there? What, if anything, did the Spirit add to the conversation? Did the Spirit remind Jesus of what that voice from heaven said? You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. For you see, it seems likely to me that the Spirit says, or stays with Jesus, I should say, in order to remind him of his identity as God's beloved. And what reinforces my sense of the likelihood of that is the fact that every one of the devil's temptations aims to challenge the idea. At least two of the temptations open with that very challenge explicitly and boldly stated. If you are the Son of God. At the heart of all these temptations, I think, is a fundamental temptation for Jesus to exchange the life he'd been given for another kind of life. And that's the temptation that Jesus consistently rejects. He accepts who he is as a gift, all the while rejecting the idea that his God-given identity is a thing he could or should have to prove to himself or to anyone else. It will cost him in the end, dearly. For each decision to remain faithful to who he is and to the God who made him that way means he will be vulnerable. He will know hunger. He will know limitations. He will know suffering and ultimately death on a cross. For even there on the cross, you may recall there were voices taunting Jesus, telling him to save himself. People passing by saying, in words that sound so reminiscent of the devil's words in today's gospel, people passing by while Jesus is on the cross saying to him, if you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. A temptation, by the way, I remind you, he rejected then too. Rejecting the temptations is costly for Jesus from start to finish, but it comes with a reward. And that brings me back to that line of the song by the Avett Brothers, the one I think Jesus might have liked. If I live the life I'm given, I won't be scared to die. We face a similar temptation to Jesus. It's not the same, not in the particulars, of course. I trust none of us is tempted to believe that we could command stones to become loaves of bread, or that we could take control of all the kingdoms of the world, or that we could act recklessly and look for guardian angels to step in and save us from our own foolishness. No, I don't imagine we face precisely the same set of temptations described in this morning's gospel, but for all that, I think we face similar temptations all the same. We face them all the time, maybe every day. For we all have a voice that taunts, a nagging voice that tempts us to think less of ourselves, the adversarial voice that questions what the divine voice spoke to us at our own baptisms, telling me, you are God's child, God's beloved, with whom God is well pleased. Parker Palmer puts it this way: though few of us get needled for thinking we are the chosen, the tone of the taunt should remind us of outward or inward voices in our lives. If you are so able, if you are a real woman or man, if you truly care, if you are such a good parent, the root temptation is almost irresistible. It is not the temptation to do a magic trick, which most of us know we cannot. It is the temptation to prove our identity, which many of us feel we must. That little word, if. That little word, if, is the start of every taunt for us, just as it was for Jesus, calling into question our essential bottom line identity as sons and daughters of God, God's beloved children in whom God is well pleased. But the gospel truth is this: we need never worry that we could ever do anything to take away the unconditional love and grace of God. So we should never imagine that there is something we need to do to prove it to ourselves or to anyone else. As I said, the particulars for us are not the same as they were for Jesus in those temptations. But the fundamental temptation to think we have to prove our worth, it's not so very different all the same. That brings me back to the line from that song with the Avett brothers sang, the one I like to imagine Jesus singing along with them. If I live the life I'm given, I won't be scared to die. There is another line in that refrain, words sung just before the part I've been focusing on. Avett brothers sing, and when I lose my direction, I look up to the sky. That's the line that makes the song a prayer. And when I lose my direction, I look up to the sky. And I wonder if there's a hint of a Lenten discipline in that line. This Lent, take a moment to look up to the sky, or if you would, look deep within yourself. Either way, the point would be to listen for that still, small voice, that still, small, divine voice, the same voice that reminds us that we, like Jesus, were named God's beloved at the start. To live the life God has given us is all that any of us can be expected. And if we live the life we're given, we need not be afraid of anything. Easier said than done. But perhaps this season of Lent can be less about imagining we should take on an extra discipline to prove our worth, and more about accepting the gift of who we really are, with no apologies and no tolerance for anyone on the outside or any voice from the inside that might suggest we need to do anything more than accept the love that is given us. Or as the psalmist reminds us, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be.